The views and opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Open Sky Radio. Please be advised.
Good evening, everybody, or good day, good morning, wherever the heck you are. Welcome to The Fire You Can't Put Out. With you again this week. It is I, Melvin. Thank you for joining us. This is for the week ending August 30th. So this closes out the month of August. This is episode 32, and once again, it has been a very fiery week and a very important week. I want to start off by saying this. I got the opportunity about a year and a half ago to go to Washington, D.C. A good friend of mine invited me, paid my way, and I did what I could, buying him meals and stuff, but quite honestly, I don't think that was enough. I could have done more for him. I quite honestly, I owe that friend in a big way. We were there for a rally, but I'd never been to D.C. before. See, I live on the West Coast like many of you do. Many of you here, listeners in America do. And Washington, D.C. is about 3,500 miles away. It takes 8 hours just to fly there. So knowing that there's not a real good chance I'd ever find myself back in D.C., I didn't just do the rally while I was there. I walked around the town as much as I could. Even when the buddy that I was with decided to hang it up at around 8 or 9 at night, I kept going out and walking around. I wanted to see as much as I could. I saw the Vietnam Memorial. I saw the Lincoln Memorial. And of course, I stood on the steps I saw the Washington Monument, but I also stood on the steps above the reflecting pool, and I saw the marker that they put in that said that MLK stood on this spot when he gave his I Have a Dream speech back in 1963. And I remember seeing that and just being not completely overcome with emotion, certainly, but I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I couldn't believe where I was standing. I'd learned about the speech in school, and to this day, it's one of the more, the media coverage this week has said it's the most important speech given. I'd say it's definitely one of the better ones, and that march way back when was it was largely economic. It was for jobs, and it was for economic equality. People were asking for more jobs and a higher minimum wage. I played my final show with Two Word Culture last Saturday, the 24th. Two Word Culture, many of you may not know, was a heavily political band that I did vocals for 8 years. We had 5 very strong years, and then 3 kind of straggling years. And so we closed out our legacy with a final show on the 24th. That was the day that most of the media started to mark the 50th anniversary, and it was also the day where there was a rally in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the 50th year of MLK's I Have a Dream speech. And I really liked the fact that the day that I got to close out my heavy political band was the same day that there was the 50th March on Washington. But then, of course, this past Wednesday, the 28th, was the actual day that it was marked. I bring you this. Throughout the day, the National Action to Realize the Dream rally, activists, leaders, and icons in the realms of the city of civil rights, women's rights, labor, and LGBT rights addressed the crowd from a podium at the Lincoln Memorial, the same spot where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his historic I Have a Dream speech 50 years ago. They urged the crowd to honor King's legacy by continuing his struggle for equality. 50 years ago, I stood right here in this spot, said Representative John Lewis, Democrat from Georgia, who at 23 was the youngest speaker at the 1963 march. I'm here again to say that those days, for the most part, are gone. But we have another fight. We must stand up and fight the good fight today. John Lewis was the youngest speaker at that time. He's also the only person who is still alive who was at the original rally and gave a speech. He's the only one left. Merle Evers Williams, the widow of Medgar Evers, who was assassinated just weeks before the 1963 march. These women, along with leaders from the LGBT, Latino, and Asian communities, helped this year's march stand in stark contrast to 1963, when only one woman spoke and the struggles of those groups went unmentioned. Al Sharpton, who was the keynote speaker, evoked Dr. King when he said the check promising equality to communities of color had bounced again. King III, the oldest son of Dr. King, who was a toddler during the original march, said that while his father's dream has not yet been realized, he would be pleased to see thousands gathered. From gun violence to voting rights, from unemployment to immigration reform, speakers had plenty of fodder to fire up their audience. It's devastating for some of us who've seen all the progress that has occurred in North Carolina decimated, Mies said. Though she wasn't at the march in 1963, Mies said she had been protesting since 1968, most recently at the Moral Monday demonstrations in Raleigh, North Carolina, where she and over 900 others were arrested between late April and August. Barack Obama gave a speech from that very, very famous spot at the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. He gave a speech in that spot. And although you can't say, well, Dr. King stood up so that Barack Obama could be president, Dr. King stood up along with so many others and did make it possible for Barack Obama to become president. There is progress being made. There are no longer whites-only fountains. There is no more segregation. Bull Connor is no longer in control. But at the same time, the conservatives have decided that now is the time to roll back the Voting Rights Act. I understand what it means to be conservative. It means you're resistant to change. And that's fine. Be resistant to change. I at times find myself being very conservative, or at least a little conservative. I'm getting a little older, and I at times am also resistant to change. But to be resistant to change and have the price to be paid that minorities don't get rights, women, African Americans, Asians, Latinos, that they either A, do not get rights, or those rights are taken away. And then, of course, the LGBT community. That is the new civil rights fight. We're making great strides, and you'll hear about that later on today's show, The Fire You Can't Put Out. But even with the strides made, there's a long way to go. Let's talk about Joe Walsh for a minute. Former Representative Joe Walsh commemorated the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington with an eyebrow-raising list of issues he billed as my own dream for America. Walsh unleashed a line of racially charged comments headed by his view that African Americans suffer from dependency on the government plantation. Ladies and gentlemen, it gets worse. From Walsh's show's website. While on Fox News with Juan Williams, Williams said, "You've got to talk about the fact that 70% of black children today are born out of wedlock. I think Dr. King would cry." I agree with Juan. But instead of invoking Dr. King's legacy to lament about present problems, I've decided to share my own dream. What follows are Joe Walsh's bullet points. And by the way, Joe Walsh was a very serious candidate. And he is also a teabagger. These are the bullet points. I have a dream that all black parents will have the right to choose where their kids attend school. I have a dream that all black boys and girls will grow up with a father. I have a dream that young black men will stop shooting other young black men. I have a dream that all young black men will say no to gangs and drugs. I have a dream that all black young people will graduate from high school. I have a dream that young black men won't become fathers until after they're married and they have a job. I have a dream that young unmarried black women will say no to young black men who want them to have sex. I have a dream that today's black leadership will quit blaming racism and the system for what ails black America. I have a dream that black America will take responsibility for improving their own lives. I have a dream that one day black America will cease their dependency on the government plantation, which has enslaved them to lives of poverty, and instead depend on themselves, their families, their churches, and their communities. You may remember Joe Walsh in November 2012 turned heads with his belief that President Obama is a historic figure who is only elected because he is black. So to say that they should not grow up without a father, to say that they will stop shooting other black men, to say that they will say no to gangs and drugs, to say that they will graduate from high school, excuse me, Mr. Walsh, are these not also white problems? Are these not also American problems? For him to stop and say, hey, I have a dream. Black this, black that, black this, black that. These are not problems that are only prevalent in the African American community. These are prevalent everywhere. Not in every single spot. Certainly there are pockets of America. And Joe Walsh has no idea how racist what he said was. Yiggity, yiggity, yikes. Say that we want them off the government plantation. See, what he didn't mention was taking part in democracy. And perhaps it's because when they're trying to take away voting rights, they're not just trying to take them away from African Americans. No. And we know they're not. They're trying to take them away from elderly people. Why? Well, because elderly people have Medicare and Social Security. Two programs that back when they were implemented, the Republicans called them socialism, Marxism, and communism. Is any of this starting to sound familiar? Well, it should. Because although the times may have changed, their playbook has not. Let's go to Tennessee. The Tennessee Green Party filed a federal lawsuit Monday to get rid of Tennessee's voter ID law, calling the legislation unconstitutional and unfair to minority voters. The voter identification law took effect January 2012 and requires voters to show a state or federally issued ID at the polls. This legislation aims to stifle voter fraud, yet many voting rights groups say the law instead disenfranchises thousands of Tennessee voters. The lawsuit was filed by Alan Woodruff, an attorney in Gray, Tennessee, who previously represented the Green Party. The defendants listed are Tennessee Secretary of State Trey Hargett and Coordinator of Elections Mark Goins. There is no justification for having the photo ID requirement, as there is no such thing as voter fraud. Woodruff said, according to the Tennessean, it's overly burdensome, it affects minorities and the progressive-leaning voters more than the typical Republican conservative, and it was intended to. This is all by design, obviously. The law was upheld in a state lawsuit last fall. Tennessee Court of Appeals said the state has the right to pass laws that protected the purity of the ballot box. That's in quotes. The purity of the ballot box. According to the Tennessean, a spokesman for Hargett and Goins had not seen the lawsuit as of Monday and did not have a comment. The fight over the Tennessee law is part of a larger battle over strict voter ID laws that have cropped up in the wake of the U.S. Supreme Court striking down a key portion of the Voting Rights Act. The U.S. Department of Justice sued Texas last week over the state's voter ID law. Leaders such as Colin Powell have recently condemned strict voter restrictions, saying that voter fraud is not substantiated and that these types of laws just make it more difficult for minorities to vote. All the while, they're looking, they're searching, they're scraping in the dirt, peeking around every corner, looking in every... We gotta stop the voter fraud. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have voter fraud. And if we do, it's really a handful of cases. The number isn't any larger than, let's say, 2 digits. But you know what we do have that seems to be cropping up in an ever-increasing number? And it's happening, by and large, in red states? Election fraud. Let's move on to Texas. They have finally said exactly what the whole point of the voter ID law is. They're not shying away from it anymore. They've had it with minorities voting. Why? Because they vote, by and large, for Democrats. So mere hours after the Supreme Court struck down Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, Texas wasted no time and reinstituted the same redistricting plan the courts had already ruled as unconstitutional. The same with their new voter suppression bill. Attorney General Holder, Texas, was the first lawsuit to be filed by the Justice Department under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And now Texas is presenting its defense. First, says Attorney General Greg Abbott, the redistricting is not about race. Oh no, it's about allowing Democrats to vote. White Democrats too. Excuse me. That's a quote. The redistricting is not about race. It's about allowing Democrats to vote. This is from their brief. DOJ's accusations of racial discrimination are baseless. In 2001, both houses of the Texas legislature were controlled by large Republican majorities, and their redistricting decisions were designed to increase the Republican Party's electoral prospects at the expense of Democrats. This is from their brief. Okay, now back to the brief. The redistricting decisions of which DOJ complaints were motivated by partisan rather than racial considerations, and the plaintiffs and DOJ have zero evidence to prove the contrary. It is perfectly constitutional for a Republican-controlled legislature to make partisan redistricting decisions, even if there are incidental effects on minority voters who support Democratic candidates. Breathe in, breathe out. Okay. Yeah, and this also from their own brief, which says it way better than I can. Furthermore, the state claims even if Texas did discriminate, and the state stresses that it did not, it was nothing as bad as the pervasive, flagrant, widespread, and rampant discrimination that originally justified pre-clearance in 1965. Right. So they're saying, hey, even if it does discriminate, look, it's not as bad as the discrimination was back in 1965. So according to this, Texas is arguing that Section 2, and in fact, the entire reasons for preclearance are all based on conditions of 1965. And so, hey, since things are better than they were in 1965, Section 2 is null and void. When Ronald Reagan decided to run for president, he hired a man to do his direct mail campaign. That man's name was Paul Weyrich. Paul Weyrich created institutions and networks that incubated new and old powerful policies and strategies to, as they say, advance liberty. He helped create the Heritage Foundation, the Free Congress Foundation, the Kingston Meeting, and the ALEC, the group that is currently behind all of the current voter suppression laws. With the backing of Coors, Weyrich and Ed Follner founded the Heritage Foundation, which is an anti-tax, anti-regulation think tank. The following year, again with the support from Coors, Weyrich founded the Committee for the Survival of a Free Congress, an organization that trained and mobilized conservative activists, recruited conservative candidates, and raised funds for conservative causes. Weyrich ran the direct mail campaign for Ronald Reagan. And in 1977, Weyrich co-founded the Christian Voice with Robert Grant. 2 years later, founded with Jerry Falwell, the Moral Majority. Weyrich coined the phrase moral majority. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to play a bit of audio for you. Now, I'm still setting up the mixing board in this studio, so it might be a little tough to hear, but I'm going to do my best. But this is Paul Weyrich, the founding father of the conservative movement, addressing a seminal religious right gathering held in Texas in the fall of 1980. So let me just cue it up here.
Now, many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down.
You heard that correctly. Our leverage in the election quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down. So often it is said that we have a liberal media. A media that just kowtows to the Democrats, does their bidding, whatever they want. ALEC is responsible for drafting a lot of the laws that are stopping people from voting. ALEC was started by Paul Weyrich. And Paul Weyrich said, in front of an audience and into a microphone with cameras running, that he does not want people to vote. It's not a coincidence. It's not a mistake. They know what they're doing. It's the beating heart of democracy. And they want to take it away from you. So, let us get into... I found this article really interesting, and I'm gonna shorten it up as much as I can, but there's an awful lot of information here, so follow me. Post 9/11 has witnessed a boom in private firms dedicated to the hyped-up threat of terrorism. The drive to privatize America's national security apparatus accelerated in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks, and it's gotten to the point where 70% of the national intelligence budget is now spent on private contractors. As Tim Sherrock reported, the private intelligence contractors have profited to the tune of $6 billion a year in 2010. Washington Post revealed that there were 1,931 private firms across the country dedicated to fighting terrorism, which is a nice way of saying making money off scaring the hell out of you. They need you to stay afraid. Let's start with the Chertoff Group. Former NSA head Michael Hayden and former Homeland Security Chief Michael Chertoff are employees of the Chertoff Group, a private firm created in 2009 that companies hire to consult on best practices for security and combating terrorism. Some of the companies the firm advises go on to win government contracts. Chertoff is the founder and chairman of the group, while Hayden serves as a principal. So they profit off a war on terror that they say is crucial to keeping Americans safe. Though it's unclear how much in total exactly the firm makes, there are some known numbers after the failed attempt in 2010 to blow up an airliner on Christmas Day with a bomb hidden in his underwear. Chertoff pushed for better airport security procedures. One of the suggestions Chertoff made was for the TSA, the Transportation Security Agency, to use full-body scanners like the ones Rapsican, one of Chertoff's group's clients, made. And sure enough, after the Christmas Day plot, the TSA ordered 300 Rapsican machines. Rapsican made $118 million from the government between 2009 and 2010. Booz Allen Hamilton, this is number 2. You know who Booz Allen is? Edward Snowden's former employer. Thousands of employees of the company provide services to the NSA, like analyzing the massive amounts of data the government agency collects every day. The company is also the shining symbol of government private security complexes' revolving door. Its vice president is the former director of national intelligence, while the current director of national intelligence is a former employee of Booz Allen. Despite the Snowden security breach, Booz Allen continues to work with the government, and they're making a lot of money from the U.S. In the last fiscal year, the company made $1.3 billion from working in U.S. intelligence. In total, Booz Allen Hamilton made over $5 billion last fiscal year. And the cash keeps coming in. In January, the company announced that it had won a contract with the Defense Department to provide intelligence services. The amount of money it could make from the deal is up to $5.6 billion. And did you know, and although they don't have any contact with, obviously he's dead now, but they never really had much contact with him before, but the Bin Laden family is a partial owner of Booz Allen Hamilton. So their kid attacks America. And like I said, they renounced any relationship with him a long time ago. But then they get to make money off of the ramped up terrorism or anti-terrorism groups that are now in America. This stuff just goes in a circle. And it's not government. People are afraid because they're being told to be afraid. It's not government. These are private companies that are making this money. Science Applications International Corporation, sometimes referred to as NSA West, because so many former NSA employees go on to work for the formerly California-based Scientific Applications International Corporation. This firm makes a ton of cash off government contracts, and they do so by hawking their expertise in combating the terrorist threat. SAIC is immensely lucrative and a large company. It boasts 42,000 employees, 20,000 of whom hold U.S. government security clearances. It is the NSA's largest contractor, according to CoreWatch, and is deeply involved with the NSA's collection of intelligence. Last year, it reported a net income of $525 million. The Center for Counterintelligence and Security Studies. Through Homeland Security grant programs like the State Homeland Security Program and the Urban Area Security Initiative, the federal government has doled out over billions of dollars to these private companies to provide Islamophobic training. You're hearing that right, ladies and gentlemen. Islamophobic training. One of these companies is called the Center for Counterintelligence and Security Studies. Based in Virginia, the center posits radical Islam as the new global ideological menace on the order of the old communist threat from the Soviet Union, as Political Research Associates noted in a 2011 report on private firms doing counter-terror training. Staff members include former FBI, CIA, and Defense Department personnel. Their claim to fame is providing education and training to members of the U.S. national security community, including law enforcement agencies. According to their website, they have trained over 67,000 people over the past decade. It is unclear exactly how much this firm makes per year, but according to the PRA report, the 5-day course for government employees on the quote-unquote global jihadist threat doctrine cost $40,000, just a hair under $40,000, $39,280. The firm also lists the cost of individual courses on their website. For a 30-day class entitled, quote, Dying to Kill Us, Understanding the Mindset of Suicide Operations, unquote, the cost is $7,856. For a 3-day course for 30 people on informant development for law enforcement to fight terrorism, the cost is $23,568. The training pushes anti-Muslim ideology. And although we're only highlighting 5 when there are thousands, here is another egregious one. Security Solutions International. Security Solutions International is yet another private firm hawking anti-Muslim training law enforcement. Anti-Muslim training to law enforcement. This Miami-based company, founded in 2004, uses its Israeli security connections to boost its standing in the market. They use Israeli security trainers in their courses, and their president, Henry Morgenstern, is a dual Israeli U.S. citizen who says he developed excellent high-level contacts with the security establishment in Israel, making SSI the premier training company for counter-terror-related subjects. The company has trained over 700 law enforcement agencies since 2004. The conferences they hold are usually well attended. This year, the SSI is putting on a conference in Orlando, Florida for 3 days. The cost for each attendee is $400. The keynote speaker this year is Steve Emerson, a well-known member of what's been termed the Islamophobia industry. SSI also makes money off its counterterrorism magazine. A yearly subscription is $35, and the company says it has 15,000 subscribers. So there's a lot of money being made on anti-terrorism. And I just want to point this out. At the end of 2010, the richest zip code in America, it was Washington, D.C. Why D.C.? There are 5 reasons. First, D.C. has always been pretty off thanks to the nation's highest concentration of college degrees. Second, federal employees who account for 1/6 of the city. Okay. Third, the federal government has the only major part of the economy that grew during the recession, and the region's contractors and employees benefited, right? Fourth, despite the president's goals, D.C. is still a hotbed for rich finance and healthcare lobbyists. Fifth is a small city bracketed between 2 very rich, very well-educated suburban regions. Okay, now let's focus on number 3, the contractors. Obviously, there's always going to be a ton of money in D.C., unless we can find a way to do campaign finance reform or get rid of the lobbyists. But until then, so much of the now there's about 5 different cities. There's San Jose, and there's LA, and there's just a couple different cities that just sort of switch off on the top spot. But DC, at the end of 2010, as reported by The Atlantic on October 19th, 2011, they were the richest zip code in America. War is big business. Now, as I go on the air tonight, there's a lot of talk about going to war with Syria. I'm not covering Syria right now for 2 reasons. One, I want more of a complete picture of what's going on before I go off half-cocked on this microphone. And 2, I try to cover smaller stories on this mic, as many small stories that aren't being talked about as I can. And Syria is not a small story right now, but I will have an opinion on this in the coming days. But what's happening right now is we're talking about going to war with Syria. There was a poll released this morning that most Americans do not support the idea of going to war with Syria. But we've said they have weapons of mass destruction and we've got to go in. Trust me, there are contractors who are chomping at the bit right now because they're ready to start making money. I want to go to this story. August 3rd, 2013, Virginia suicide rate is now the highest it's been in 13 years. Virginians are now 3 times more likely to die from suicide than they are from homicide, and Virginia is not alone. Over the past decade, our nation's suicide rate has been steadily climbing, rising a staggering 23%. According to the CDC, there were 700,000 emergency room visits in 2010 for self-inflicted injuries. The fact is, American suicide rate is on the rise, and conservative economic policies are to blame. That's right, conservative economic policies. In a study released in May, Professors David Stuckler and Sanjay Basu of Oxford University in England found that suicide rates in both the U.S. and U.K. increase when working-class wages and wealth decline. The study calculates, for example, there were 4,750 excess suicides during the recession period in the U.S. compared with suicide rates before the recession. Stuckler and Basu conclude the report by saying that what we've learned is the real danger to public health is not recession per se, but austerity. That's right, the very same austerity policies that Republicans in Washington are constantly pushing on us are the same policies that are driving Americans to kill themselves. These findings are nothing new. Australian research shows that suicides increase under conservative governments in their country as well. A team of Australian scientists analyzed statistics for the New South Wales area of Australia between 1901 and when the federal government was established in 1998. Then they looked at which political parties had control in both state and federal governments in New South Wales, which have consistently been under either Labour or Conservative control. Labour is like their Democratic Party. And surprise, the scientists found that the highest rates of suicide occurred when Conservative state and federal governments were in power. And here's another smoking gun. When Conservative-backed austerity policies began to ravage Greece in 2010, the suicide rate shot up by 18%. In Athens alone, the suicide rate soared 25%. Before austerity came to Greece, the nation had the lowest suicide rate in the entire EU, the entire European Union. In other European nations hit with austerity, the results are the same. In Italy, for example, the suicide rate has also increased thanks to austerity policies. I don't want to say one-party rule, because that's not fair. Honestly, there are things I like about Democrats. There are things I like about Republicans. There are vastly more things I like from the left side of the aisle. But it's causing people to die. Conservative economic policies, for all their bellyaching, screaming about being pro-life, you're not pro-life. You're pro-war. That's not life. Okay? You're letting the rich get richer and watching the poor starve. You're taking away health care. You're taking away food benefits, affordable housing, fighting for lower wages. Those kind of things lead to not just the deterioration of families, but they also lead to death. In Clackamas County, sheriff's deputies arrested Timothy Dean Alsip. Alsip's arrest at a Bank of America branch outside of Portland, Oregon, was especially easy because the suspect remained at the scene of the crime, according to CBS Seattle. Speaking with members of the media, Clackamas County Sheriff's Office spokesman Deputy Mark Nikolai described the strange chain of events beginning just a little after 10 a.m. on August 23rd. Alsip handed over a note saying, this is a holdup. Give me $1. Nikolai said the events inside the bank, according to local media reports. Rather than flee with his ill-gotten dollar, however, Alsip reportedly took a seat in the lobby and quietly waited for police to arrest him. Originally charged with both second-degree robbery and third-degree theft, Alsip saw his robbery charge dismissed according to the sheriff's office website. Alsip remains in jail, having failed to pay $40,000 bail on the theft charge. He did this to get health care. He said that he robbed the bank in order to receive medical care in jail. Before this, he had no criminal record. He had apparently been acting strangely in the days before the robbery and asked random people for help, even called 911 on himself to complain of various imaginary problems. Whether or not Alsip's health problems are legitimate, his plan to seek jailhouse health care may have been inspired by a similar robbery in North Carolina 2 years ago. At that time, James Verone robbed a bank for health care in June 20th of 2011. It's James Verone if you want to Google it. James Land in Orange County, California said he robbed the bank because he needed shelter and medicine. November 16th, 2012. And the conservatives are fighting right now, fighting like crazy to make sure that you don't get health care when people are robbing banks just to get inside the jail system because they know they'll get health care inside there. Think about the state of things. It doesn't seem right. You shouldn't have to go to jail to get health care. I predict that when Congress comes back into session in about a week, we'll see the Republicans try to repeal Obamacare for the 41st time. After that, they'll only be a month away from when people begin to enroll in Obamacare. Always blaming the poor. That's the narrative. Always blaming the poor. It's their fault. This comes to us from Utah. Utah's welfare drug testing scheme has yielded only 12 positive results since the program started last year, though it may have deterred some from seeking benefits. From August 2012 through July 2013, the state pre-screened 4,730 applicants to the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program with a written test. The state followed up with an actual drug test for the 466 of those whose written tests suggested a likelihood of drug use. The 466 tests turned out 12 positive results. 12 out of 4,730. Now, they only tested 466 of them, but all 4,730 all had to take a written test, which had to be developed and which had to be administered. And then 466 drug tests had to be administered. The results were similar when Florida launched the welfare drug testing program in 2011. Just 2.6% of applicants tested positive. National surveys usually find that about 8% of respondents used drugs in the previous month. Utah's drug screening cost the state about $31,000, but here, Representative Brad Wilson told HuffPo he thinks the bill saved more than it cost. He said an additional 247 Utahns dropped out of the TNAF application process after they were told they were going to get a drug test. And so he says that there would have been, the Department of Workforce Services here in Utah estimates the benefits for these folks that these folks would have received would have been approximately $369,000. Basically, benefits we didn't pay to the people who are more likely who are likely using controlled substances. We spent $31,000 on this program over the last year. We've saved at least $370,000, if not more. Maybe. Because those people backed out after you told them that they had to pee in a cup in order to get their food benefits. Maybe they didn't like feeling like criminals. Maybe they decided that they're just going to go rob somebody. Maybe they decided that they're just going to steal because it's easier than getting the third degree. When money is spent and nobody likes welfare, nobody likes food stamps, the idea of other people working like you and I working, and other people getting benefits from that. Nobody likes that idea, and I understand. But here's the thing. Our fellow Americans are going to survive by any means necessary. Human beings, and that's what they are. They're human beings. They have a basic need to survive, whatever it takes. Also, money spent, and it doesn't matter which money it is, your money, my money, government money, any money that is spent in this country has what is known to economists as a multiplier effect. That dollar is not just spent once. It's spent again and again and again. And a dollar becomes $1.63 or $1.80 or sometimes even $2. So maybe you saved the state $370,000 by your own estimates. Maybe you saved, or maybe you cost the economy $1 million. If I were to hold an event in this town that I live in, and I said, I expect your town to make $1 million, they would be ecstatic, right? What's it going to cost us? I said, well, after it's all said and done, you're going to make $1 million. It's not a lot of money, but any money in the coffers is good money. And then if I said, meh, I'm not going to do it now, you better hope they didn't start spending that $1 million already, because you're not going to get it. Money has a multiplier effect. And people have a need to survive. And making people feel like criminals for being on welfare, and I was on welfare as a kid. I won't go on it again, because I have the ability to work. Some of us don't, so I'm not going to get on my high horse. You want to vote, and you want to eat. There's a group in America that says you shouldn't get to do those things. Let's move on to R. Robinson. R. Robinson, a vocal skeptic of man-made climate change who unsuccessfully ran against Peter DeFazio in Oregon in 2010 and 2012, was elected as the Oregon Republican Party's new chairman. Okay? The events in the last... Okay, so let me say this. Chairwoman Suzanne Gallagher stepped down late Friday just ahead of a recall vote brought by party officials accusing her of mismanaging the party and its finances since her February election. Party leaders were quickly to switch the recall effort into an election for a new chair, which Robinson ultimately won on the third ballot in a 55-52 vote over Party Vice Chair Bill Courier. The events in the last couple of months are a testimony to why Republicans are not seen in a good light, Gallagher said in a statement regarding her resignation. The actions of some members have demonstrated the character flaws perceived by the public as uncaring, angry, and antagonistic. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not going to go away. Robinson, a biochemist who gained support from libertarians like Ron Paul, as well as teabaggers, during his unsuccessful congressional bids, has been outspoken in his belief that humans are not the root cause of global warming. Somebody deserves a unicorn. Robinson is behind the Global Warming Petition Project, which claims to have the support of 31,487 American scientists opposed to climate change theories. He's also the author of a long-running newsletter titled Access to Energy, which drew scrutiny during his campaigns. In a 1994 newsletter on AIDS, he appeared to question whether HIV is the cause of AIDS and alleged that the epidemic was exaggerated to create a crisis. He wrote, AIDS is conveniently serving as an excuse for all sorts of social engineering, especially in public schools, that could be sustained without a crisis. Robinson was also criticized for his 1997 suggestion that nuclear waste should be diluted and sprinkled over the ocean. He also characterized public school as a form of child abuse. I drive along I-5 in northern Oregon, southern Washington, and I sometimes make the drive down to Eugene, and I couldn't help but notice that on the way to Eugene, after you get past Salem, this is during the election last year, every single mile was at least one R. Robinson sign. And these weren't the small, little, teeny, tiny yard signs. These are the gigantic, could almost be like yard billboards. Like, they're huge signs. At least one every mile. Some were several in a mile. Just 100 of these signs in this one section of Oregon. Monster expensive signs. I know. You can't tell me that Art Robinson isn't bought and paid for. Though his signs tried very unconvincingly to convince you that he was not. Let's get to some good news. In the children's game Duck, Duck, Goose, players sit in a circle. One child is designated as it, walks around the circle, tapping each player on the head, calling out duck, until finally choosing one of the players to be Goose. The goose jumps up, runs around the circle, trying to tag it before he can sit in the goose's spot. Several participants in the Solidarity Sing-Along replicated the Duck, Duck, Goose idea to turn daily arrests into a fun game. Several pink signs were made with duck on one side and goose on the other. As the Capitol Police circled the sing-along on Monday, August 19th, everyone held up their duck signs. When the Capitol Police stopped to arrest me, I flipped my sign over to Goose before I was cuffed and taken away. Instead of arrest angering protesters and getting them to shout, "Shame, shame," each arrest was a comical moment reminiscent of a child's game. In recent days, the total number of arrests of participants in the daily Solidarity Sing-Along in Wisconsin has passed the 250 mark. The singing is an hour-long event that has occurred every weekday in the Capitol Rotunda since the original 2011 uprising and has gone largely undisturbed with the exception of arrests in the fall of 2012. And since July 24th of this year. The number of participants has gone from several dozen before July 24th to nearly 500 this past August 19th. The most recent crackdown has attracted the attention of national media such as Ed Schultz and Democracy Now! Capitol Police Chief David Irwin was hired just over a year ago and made headlines when he stated the Capitol Police policy could include hitting protesters if they were determined by an officer to be a threat. So what's going on in Wisconsin? Well, since they brought this guy in, and since Scott Walker's getting really sick of people gathering every day and singing songs about freedom, songs about unionization, and songs against Scott Walker, Scott Walker has decided to start having them arrested, even hired a new police chief that thinks it's okay to not only arrest them, but strike them. Police brutality. Unnecessary force. It could be said that Governor Scott Walker wants to rid the Capitol of the daily protests against his administration before the national media comes to Wisconsin. If he decides to announce his bid for the presidency in 2016. See, if Walker does decide to run for president, he'll have to do so with the united resistance of thousands of Wisconsinites, including public employees whose checks are signed by Governor Walker. I want to say, I support you in Wisconsin. Keep the fight going. You've kept it up for 2 years. Keep it going for a few more. Yeah, when he decides to run for president on the national Turn America into a right-to-work country, stand strong, cheeseheads. Stand strong, Wisconsinites. We're counting on you. We don't want that dirtbag to be president any more than you want him to be your governor. On to more good news. Chelsea Manning's lack of access to hormone therapy in military prison could spark a lawsuit and potentially set a military-wide precedent for transgender service members. We covered last week that Bradley, who became Chelsea, who wants to become Chelsea, announcing that after his or her conviction. Manning's defense attorney, David Coombs, vowed Thursday to do everything in my power to make sure they're forced to provide her hormone therapy at Fort Leavenworth because the prison is citing an Army regulation banning transgender people from serving in the military as its basis for denying Manning treatment. It will only provide her hormone therapy if it is forced to. Chelsea Manning's refusal of treatment by the military could turn into a very, very interesting game changer. The ACLU said in a statement following Manning's announcement that denying her treatment might violate her constitutional rights. Here's the thing. She was diagnosed with gender dysphoria, which is recognized by the American Psychological Association, and is now decided to identify as a woman. If the military decides, at Fort Leavenworth, if they decide to not provide hormone therapy for a condition that is recognized as legitimate, it could change some things. Manning still making change, still inspiring change, even there in prison. Nathaniel Frank, who wrote a widely cited book about Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2009, says he doubts a lawsuit aimed at Manning's prison conditions would have an impact on the wider Army regulations. Still, he said, I do think because of the publicity around Manning, this could be a test case for how transgender people are treated when incarcerated. Yeah, you can still bring about major change. Targeting the cost of higher education, more good news, President Obama on Thursday unveiled a broad new government rating system for colleges that would judge schools on their affordability and perhaps be used to allocate federal financial aid. The president, speaking to a student-heavy crowd of 7,000 at the University of Buffalo, said he expected pushback from those who have profited from the ballooning cost of college, but argued that the nation's economy still shaky and students facing increasing global competition, making college affordable is an economic imperative. Higher education cannot be a luxury, Obama said during the first stop on a 2-day bus tour through New York and Pennsylvania. Every American family should be able to get it. Average student debt stands at $26,000, and the tuition sticker price at a public four-year college is up 27% beyond overall inflation. According to a College Board survey, at private schools, the average student's cost has risen 13% above overall inflation. The new rating system does not require congressional approval, and the White House is aiming to have it set up before the 2015 school year. But Obama does need support from Congress in order to use the ratings as a basis for parceling out federal financial aid. In addition to tuition, schools will also be rated on average student loan debt, graduation rates, and the average earnings of graduates. Under Obama's proposal, students attending highly rated schools could receive larger grants and more affordable loans. The president is also seeking legislation to give colleges a bonus based on the number of students they graduate who receive Pell Grants. The goal is to encourage colleges to enroll and graduate low and moderate income students. Here's the thing. Putting this in place could help more people get into school and get through school and become educated voters. He doesn't need congressional approval for it, but he would need it because of the way college is currently paid for. He would need at least some help. And trust me, the Congress right now, run by Republicans in the House, they are not interested in seeing people become more educated. Saddled with debt, yes. Educated, absolutely not. One last good story, then on to my final thought. The U.S. Department of the Treasury announced Thursday that when it comes to taxes, it will recognize same-sex couples' marriages, even if they are in a state that does not. The decision, which was prompted by the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling to overturn the Defense of Marriage Act, marks the latest political progress for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community. Prior to this spring, the IRS did not recognize same-sex married couples pursuant to Section 3 of DOMA, but DOMA was overturned. Thursday's ruling by Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew provides a uniform policy for the IRS. The state of celebration, where the wedding took place, now trumps the state of residency when it comes to federal tax status for same-sex married couples. Today's ruling provides certainty and clear, coherent tax filing guidance for all legally married same-sex couples. It provides access to benefits, responsibilities, and protections under federal tax law that all Americans deserve, Lew said in a statement. This ruling also assures legally married same-sex couples that they can move freely throughout the country throughout the country, knowing that their federal filing status will not change. Under the new Treasury policy, all federal provisions where marriage is a factor, including filing status, employee benefits, IRA contributions, earned income, child tax credits, and income gift and estate taxes will apply to same-sex couples regardless of where they live. On the flip side, gay couples also will now be subject to the so-called marriage penalty, in which some, usually upper middle class, joint filers incur a higher tax burden than they were if they filed as single people. The policy only applies to married couples and not those in domestic partnerships or same-sex unions, ladies and gentlemen. Freedom, equality, true freedom. It's coming. We started this program today with talking about the 50th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech given in Washington, D.C., in front of a crowd of 100,000 or so. Freedom for our gay brothers and sisters. Freedom for African Americans, Asians, Latinos. Freedom, true freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned a few times on this program, I was raised very, very poor. My clothes generally did not fit. My meals were at times few and far between. And when I did eat, it was very low quality food. Sometimes I had a house. Sometimes I did not. Sometimes I had a bed. Most of the time I did not. And we grew up on welfare. I didn't feel free. I wasn't in jail. I wasn't tied to a tree. I wasn't eternally falling down a black hole. But I wasn't free. But according to conservative ideology, I was. Because I wasn't getting government help. But wait a minute. We were on welfare. Yeah, but that doesn't keep people alive. See, that keeps people broke. Here's the thing. Fighting against Obamacare, right? They're saying we're fighting against Obamacare because we want to keep people free. Okay? We're fighting against regulation because we want to keep people free. We're fighting against taxes because we want to keep people free. So if people are broke, hungry, homeless, and don't have clothes, as long as there's no government interference in their life, then according to conservative ideology, those people are free. I heard a quote a number of years ago, and it said, "A necessitous man is not free." So if you are in need, you are not free. If you do not have a place to live, if you do not know where your next meal is coming from, if you do not have they say, go get a job. What if there's no work? What if austerity is official government policy? What if you've shipped too many jobs overseas and now there's no work for us? How can you call us free? If we need health care and can't get it, are we free? No. If our stomachs are rumbling, as mine frequently did, these are dark days that my children will never see, obviously, because I'm working, and I'm working very hard, sometimes several jobs if I have to, whatever it takes. But we're not free if we're necessitous. We're not free if we're without. Well, we can't be helping our fellow Americans because they're just bums. They just want to live off the system. I'm sure there's a very small section of people who are looking to live off other people. Very, very small. I think by and large Americans want to work. Americans want to go to work every day, want to earn a wage, want to feel pride in what they do, want to feel accomplishment. So to take that teeny tiny sliver of the country that's trying to live off people and say, well, that's obviously everybody who's not mind-numbingly rich, is dishonest and disingenuous at best. We should all have the opportunity, and none of us should feel terrible poverty or extreme need. What makes us free? What keeps us free? The idea that if you work hard, you'll get what you need and you'll get what you want. There's an old quote that says there's enough for every man's need, but not every man's greed. They have an awful lot at the top, and they're taking it from us. What keeps us free? Not having to worry about whether or not we're going to eat, and not having our right to vote taken away, and not watching our gay brothers and sisters be oppressed for religious reasons. Think about it, ladies and gentlemen. What makes you free? I want to thank you for joining me again. I want to send a shout out to Kevin, Angela, and Leo, my co-hosts. I know you're out there. I'm keeping the fires burning here while you are away, and I look forward to you joining us again. Be sure to join us again next week for episode 33, where, well, by that time, we may or may not be at war with Syria. Thank you for your continued support. We are the fire you can't put out, and we will prevail. My name is Melvin. Good day.